Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We're coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, historical neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so very honored and absolutely delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. How do we do that? Well, we do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. You can join us in this mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, Good Pods, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, CastBox, Player FM, wherever you find your favorite shows. We have a fantastic show lined up for you today. First up, Olivia Abtahi is here to celebrate The Interpreter. And later, Robert McGuire will be here to celebrate The Origami Kid. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by We're Going to the Dinosaur Forest, written by Marie Nichols. Marie Nichols was recently on my Connecticut Book Festival's podcast, and what a delightful woman. One of the things she said really struck home with me. She said, parents nurture with care, siblings are taught to share, but grandparents embrace the dares. We're Going to the Dinosaur Forest is a colorful, fun-filled book where this grandmother dares to embark on a wild journey with her grandson into the dinosaur forest. It's available on Amazon. It's also available on bookshop.org. You and your kids and you and your grandkids are going to love this book. It's We're Going to the Dinosaur Forest, written by Marie Nichols. Join us right now from the great state of Colorado. Our guest is here today to celebrate her new picture book. It's called The Interpreter. Please welcome to the show, Olivia Abtahi. Hey, Olivia, how are you?
Hey, Jed, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing well.
I'm delighted to have you on. Folks, you are not able to see. Olivia is wearing this beautiful sweater that is. I'm jealous. I am jealous. I'd love to have a hoodie that looked just like that.
Thanks, Jed. I try to do something called dopamine dressing. So just wearing bright colors that makes me happy.
You know, I know I'm wearing all black today. I look like a priest coaching a basketball team, but typically I that's how I dress, with lots of colors. I was a professional clown. I made a living full time for 35 years. So, I dig it, but I never had a name for it. It was just, well, people said I dressed weird, but now I can say it's the dopamine attire.
I'm sorry, Jed. I think we're going to need a whole episode on your 35 years as a professional clown, because that sounds incredible.
Oh, it was the best. I had so much fun. A lot of people would refer to me as more of a magician than a clown, because at some point I stopped wearing the white face. And here, I just discussed this in an episode. Here in the United States, clowns are not respected as artists. When I travel and I perform in different countries, it's like I'm an artist and the clown is really elevated, but not so much here. But it was the best way to make a living. So much fun.
I believe it. That sounds incredible.
Well, you are bringing smiles to kids' faces in a different way through your writing. Tell us about The Interpreter, please.
Yeah. The Interpreter is a picture book illustrated by Monica Arnaldo with words by me, and it follows Cecilia, who is a girl who interprets English to Spanish for her family.
That is a job that I know I know many people in my life who had to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still see so many kids performing this job. And I know in this country, there are professional interpreters. If you want to go to the library for story time, for example, if you request it 3 days in advance in Denver, you can get it. If you want to go to a parent teacher conference, you can request, I believe, months in advance. But for so many other things that fall through the cracks, a lot of children are the ones who end up interpreting English to the language for their families to understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And that must bring up lots of issues for the kids. I mean, here they are doing this very important job of interpreting. And we're not just talking about interpreting for your teacher or when you go to the grocery store. There are kids who have to go into like the registry of motor vehicles and, you know, maybe with a lawyer and do that kind of interpreting.
Oh my gosh, for sure. And once again, these spaces do say officially that there is an interpreter, but the amount of hoops that families have to jump through makes it just impossible sometimes. So in the book, we have Cecilia interpreting for her mom at, you know, the hairstylist, or for her dad at the DMV. We've got folks at the accountant, and it starts with them at an urgent care facility with the doctor saying, hey, can you explain to these parents that this baby's very sick and we're going to need to do some treatment? So not only is Cecilia literally interpreting, saying like, you know, here's what they said, but for example, in the doctor, she is trying to calm the parents down and say, don't worry, the doctor is going to help, instead of communicating the gravity of the situation, right? She doesn't want to shame the parents. Or when the hairdresser says, hey, you know, this lady should have seen me sooner. Look at all these split ends. Cecilia says, don't worry, she'll cut your hair the way you like. So throughout this all, she's not just literally interpreting, she's figuratively interpreting as well. Because there's so many cultural things that she's kind of trying to screen, if you will. She's deciding and picking and choosing what her family's going to hear because of the shame that some of these folks are trying to communicate, or some of the harder things that maybe Cecilia wants to shield her parents from.
That is something that I never took into account. I'd imagine that if Cecilia's interpreting for a teacher and the teacher's saying Cecilia's not doing her homework, I can imagine Cecilia saying, oh, your daughter is wonderful. She's never missed anything. But you are true as somebody who is married to a wonderful Latina. I know that there are definitely cultural differences, and that's a lot for a 6, 7, 8. That's a lot for a 30-year-old to take into consideration.
For sure. I mean, it's something I still do with my husband, who is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you know, just a total Western European mutt who cannot trace his family roots back. He has no traditions. They've been purposefully kind of wiped out, if you will, for his families to assimilate so many decades ago. So for him, it's really interesting when, you know, we go to someone's house and they offer us tea and my husband says, oh, I'm not thirsty. And I'm like, buddy, this isn't about you being thirsty. You got to say yes to the tea. Okay. And so now with my own kids, there's some cultural things I try to impart on them as well. And still with my parents, when I'm with my husband's family, there's cultural things I don't understand. So, I was inspired to write this book because even though my parents are fluent in English, my dad is from Iran, my mom is from Argentina, they all learned English in their respective countries at their English schools. It is not the same upbringing or education that you would have here. So we would have moments where, you know, the example I always give is like a bake sale. They'd say, okay, parents, there's going to be a bake sale. And my parents would say, oh, great, you know, we'll make some shirini, some like Persian sweets. And I have to explain, like, no, you have to make cupcakes or cookies. And then my mom will say, okay, great. Well, I'll just go pick some up at the store. And I say, no, it has to be homemade from like a box. She's like, but I can just buy it and bring it in a box pre-made. I'm like, no. You have to get the Duncan Hines, you know, like box, because that is what these people are expecting. And my poor parents would be so confused. They're like, but none of this is going to taste good. I'm like, it doesn't have to taste good. It has to taste sweet, because that's the palate here. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it has to be sweet and moist, which are like the two most important things for these types of baked goods. So for my parents, it was just a lot of moments like that where I'd explain, like they understood what the task was, but they didn't understand some of the cultural things. So I'm rambling here, but that's just one of the moments where it's like, even if your folks speak English, it's still not the full cultural assimilation that maybe other people are expecting.
Yeah. My wife, while I was out clowning around the country, my wife was teaching special needs kids in the Boston Public Schools for 34 years. And, she was somewhat fluent in sign language. And, my daughter, when she was in kindergarten, we were very close to her teacher. My son and daughter had the same kindergarten teacher, and the kindergarten teacher needed to communicate to this one kid's parents, and one of the parents was deaf. And so she called my wife and said, "Can you come and interpret?" Well, one of the parents was deaf, but the other parent spoke Portuguese, which my wife wasn't fluent in. She's fluent in Spanish. So there was this thing. It was like Abbott and Costello, who's on first, and she's interpreting, and then she would get something from the dad, and she'd try to interpret from Portuguese into
The Spanish, yeah.
It was.
I've done that.
It was a trip.
I believe it. And part of the inspiration for this book was seeing the movie Coda, or Children of Deaf Adults. And this book, I know we're, over audio right now, but this book is really dialogue driven. So there is narration, but there's a lot of speech bubbles happening. And when I was trying to figure out how to write this book, I watched movies. I watched Coda. That was so huge for me. I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, where you have an accountant who's saying, "Where's your daughter?" Like, you guys don't understand what I'm asking for. And this accountant ends up having a larger role, but that's part of the premise, is these parents who haven't assimilated. And a TV show called Severance, where you have someone kind of opening a door in their brain and cutting off parts of themselves as they go to their jobs. So as I was I knew I wanted to write about this story, but I couldn't figure out the execution. So I ended up writing it as a screenplay. And so never in the book does Cecilia say those are her parents. In the beginning, we just thought it was a family, and I love the way the illustrator interpreted it. So we know it's her parents from the beginning, but in the beginning when I originally wrote it, it never said that those were her parents. So she was completely partitioning that part of her life when she was translating. But yeah, I do think seeing the deaf community, seeing how a lot of kiddos take on a lot of responsibility, and interpreting sign language, because I see that here in Denver as well, was just like a huge inspiration for this book.
Yeah. It's amazing that we're living in a time right now that, we basically have an interpreter that we carry around in our pocket. I know when I was in a rehab a couple of years ago, there was somebody getting therapy, and there was a little tablet there, and there was an interpreter working with the patient and the therapist. So we're moving in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm imagining, because I've heard, especially from my wife and her friends who are in education, there's so many, they run into so many people who are like, why do we need an interpreter? These people should learn how to speak English. And maybe, certainly if you learn the language of the country that you're living in, that would be beneficial to you at some point. But I just think it's like, why would you have any issue with helping somebody be heard, helping somebody to understand, and helping somebody to fit in and get along better?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, especially for the United States, that it is one of the few Western democracies that does not have an official language.
Mm-hmm.
English is not this country's official language. I'm just going to repeat that again. English is not this country's official language. It is in all of the government texts and literature. It is spoken, but nowhere in the Constitution or in any laws does it say that this is the official language of the country, which leaves this really big gray space, right? Because then you've got like Nigeria, and English is one of the official languages of Nigeria, but not really the United States. It doesn't say it. So when we say, oh, you should learn English, it's like, well, I'm in Colorado, and it's Colorado because it was what was then called Mexico right now.
Mm-hmm.
So when people are speaking Spanish here, it's actually a lot more historically accurate than speaking English. So, and when a lot of folks say, well, why don't you just learn English? I think it's just important to realize that this country is just such a melting pot of different cultures and different languages by design. Once again, there are no laws saying that you cannot speak these other languages. This is built into the Constitution and the framework of our nation, especially since you're in Boston, right? So huge Portuguese community there, huge Brazilian community then as a result as well. And a lot of folks go up there and they speak Portuguese. And then you've got, the huge Native American population, the Wampanoags, who invited and welcomed the people speaking English in the first place. So that's even older. And I'm so lucky in Colorado to have a huge Native American population here. I mean, I live near an Indian community center. So I understand when people get frustrated that someone doesn't speak their own language, right? I mean, that's part of the book. Cecilia gets a little burnt out at the end, but I just think it's so short-sighted, and it shows that you're only thinking about this country in the 200-year kind of view and not about America's future or America's past, which I think is just really unfortunate when people say, oh, you should speak this language. And it's just like, don't you want a future for this country? Don't you want it to adapt and grow and change and be wonderful forever? I mean, English is now the diplomatic language, but it was French beforehand. And I'm Iranian, and cuneiform was the first written language, and Persian is so much older, much older than English and French combined. So, I think it's important to realize that humanity has just so much history and so much left to go. And that when you relegate people to one language, it's just such a shame. It's just such a shame.
Well, it is. And, I'm one of those people. I have a very difficult time learning languages, but I also don't care if I make a mistake. So
Huge.
I'll give it a try. And when I go someplace, I always learn how to say hello, thank you, goodbye, and I'm sorry, I don't speak your language. Would you be able to speak English? And
I love that.
Everywhere I go, people are like, dude, no problem.
Well, I think that's why so many children end up being interpreters, is because the older you get, the more conscious you are of feeling stupid for making a mistake. And kids don't care. And that's why so much of this falls to children to be interpreters. And it's not that children pick up languages more quickly. It's that children just are less self-aware of any mistakes. Adults are like, oh my gosh, did I conjugate that right in the third person plural? And the kid's just like, give me the ball, let's play. So I love that, when you're trying to learn a language, you're like, I don't care if I look stupid, because that is the number one thing holding people back when they're trying to learn English, especially if they're, older and more set in their ways, and they're already unfortunately feeling stupid or ashamed for other reasons, socioeconomic reasons, citizenship reasons. And then you've got this language barrier on top of it. So no one wants to look any more foolish than they need to. And that, unfortunately hurts folks, and they maybe don't take chances that they should with language. I know for me, with my Persian, when I'm speaking, I'm terrified of sounding, I sound like a judge. Unfortunately, I speak very formal Persian. I sound like a high cleric. And so, yeah, I hear you. I love that you kind of throw that out the window when you're learning a new language, when you're going to another country, because that's part of it. That's part of learning a new language.
Yeah. You'll appreciate this. Last year when I was touring El Salvador with Clowns Without Borders, a wonderful organization, somehow the only guy who wasn't fluent in Spanish became the master of ceremonies. And so the very first show, I start off and I said, and here's Val's from El Salvador. And I was speaking Spanish. And here's Josie from where's she from? Oregon. From Oregon. And then they introduced me. And my intention was to say, we are Clowns Without Borders. Somos payasos sin fronteras. And instead, I said, somos payasos sin frentes, which is
without breaks.
Clowns without foreheads. So, and they insisted that I keep it in. So
I love that. It's the I'm a jelly donut of our generation.
Well, that's it. I mean, my own kids are like you. They understand Spanish probably more than I am, but they're very self-conscious, and so they won't they won't give it a shot, or it's very hard for them to get them to come out and give it a shot. And meanwhile, it's like, just people are going to appreciate the fact that you're trying to speak their language.
Absolutely. I think it goes a long way. And it doesn't even start with speaking a language. It's just trying to pronounce someone's last name, saying, I'm going to mess it up, but I want to give it a shot. Let's work together. It's when people don't even try and they say, I'm not going to pronounce that. I'm going to mess it up. That's where, I think some opportunities are missed. And I think just putting yourself out there is endearing, and it helps people connect.
You're right. I don't know if that's the line I used before we started recording, but that whole thing of, listen, I might mispronounce your name. I apologize, but let me give it a try. And we've had authors from all over the world, and boy, people really, even when I get it wrong, I've been getting it right more often than not lately. But even if I get it wrong, people are really grateful that I gave it a shot.
Yeah, so much of communication and language and interpreting in general is just being game. Like, just try it.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful lesson to teach our kids. Imagine all the friendships that we didn't have because we saw somebody spoke a different language and we didn't try to figure out a way to communicate.
Yeah, and I think what's so wonderful about smaller children especially is that I've seen, my kiddos go to a minority school where English is not the number one language spoken. And it doesn't matter. I'm noticing the younger they are, the less it matters. The more they're just going to say, hey, like, let's go play on the swings. There is a common language of childhood of just playing, of just putting yourself out there, of fighting too over the same toys or same, swing set or whatever. And it's really heartwarming, and it does give me hope to see. Even, we were in Argentina visiting our family in October, and my kiddos would just go to the playground and just like make a friend. And, my kid's Spanish isn't perfect, but they're willing to give it a shot, and they made friends on the merry-go-round, and like just playing soccer and kicking the ball around. And that was one of those moments where I was like, I don't know, it was just really wonderful to see. Definitely a core memory.
Yeah. We encourage, of course, this is reading with your kids, so we encourage families to read together, and picture books. I imagine most families are reading picture books together with their kids. But I'm guessing that this wasn't written necessarily for the kid who has non-English speaking parents to sit down and read with them, because the parents won't be able to read the English unless it's printed also in Spanish. But But books are such wonderful windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. What kind of conversations do you imagine a typical English-speaking family would have as they're reading this book together?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there is a simultaneous Spanish publication, just to be clear.
Yeah.
But I have had families tell me that their kids are asking questions. I think it's more, if you see the cover, there's a girl in a suit, and you have a kid who is the age of the children reading this, who has a lot of power and a lot of she's doing very adult things. Mm-hmm. And so the question that's coming up is like, wow, this girl is like, mommy, is she like doing their taxes? And it's like, no, she's just taking them to the accountant. But you got a kid who looks like them, who's doing, quote unquote, grown up activities. So for these kiddos, it's kind of interesting for them, because they're like, oh my gosh, like I could be a grown up too. Like I could make big decisions. But in another way, they're like, whoa, like this is out of my depth. Like I don't have to do this because my parents already speak English. So it's definitely eye-opening. It is a window into another world. But then for the Spanish version, it's definitely a mirror, in that this book is meant to show these children how to ask for help. As Cecilia is going through the story, she gets burnt out, and she starts to confuse her interpreting life and her other job, which is to be a kid. And, she's trying to play soccer with her friends throughout the book. And the worlds are kind of falling in on each other, where she has a door that she takes when she needs to go to her interpreting job. There's an intercom that says, Cecilia, you're up. and the doors are opening when they shouldn't. And she thinks she's in a soccer game at one point, but she's actually at the hairdresser's, and she's wearing her jersey to a interpreting meeting, and the worlds start to blend together. And she gets burnt out, and and there's a scene where this all comes to like a head. And for the families where everyone is speaking Spanish, it's all of the speech bubbles are colored a certain way. So, blue is English, yellow is Spanish. There's some Persian in the book that shows up in pink when things go together, and the blue and the yellow go together to make red. Like, all of these different things are happening. The children who are reading this with their parents, I want them to learn how to ask for help, which, if you are a first generation immigrant, you owe so much of your success and your happiness to your parents, because they chose to raise you in this country. And the filial piety that goes with it and the obligations that go with it mean that no matter what your parents need, you will do. So you will see a lot of first gen kids be like, I want to be an artist, but my mom wanted me to be a doctor, so now I'm a doctor. Like, I'm going to buy my parents a house. I take care of my parents, like, in ways that I think families who've existed in this country for decades and centuries, maybe that's not the same culturally. So I wanted this book to be just a way to start the conversation of saying, hey, mom, like, this is a lot. Or like, hey, dad, like, I need some help. Like, I can't keep interpreting. Like, and in the book, they find a solution altogether. And it's not a way to shame the parents. It's not a way to shame the kids, but it is a way to give kids agency in a new way, not to just be a grown up, but to be in charge of their own energy levels, in charge of their own needs and wants and fears and hopes, and to just kind of say that, hey, there's a boundary between you as a person and your parents as a person, and that's not a bad thing. So it's showing healthy boundaries, and it's starting for families who speak Spanish. That's the question that I hear coming up, and that's the question where my heart kind of breaks, because I see these kids who are doing that all the time, and they're saying like, oh, they're saying it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to say, hey, this is too much.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that you originally wrote this as a screenplay. Any thoughts of trying to get this made into a TV show or a movie? Or
Oh gosh, I guess that's a question for my film agent. I think it would lend itself very well. And I think what's kind of nice about this story is that it's really universal. It's set in the United States here for us, but there's so many immigrant communities around the world where I know, especially like, just for example, the Persian diaspora, the Iranian diaspora, you have a huge group in Sweden. Like, what's it like being an interpreter from, Persian to Swedish? You're not just doing two different languages, but two different alphabets, right? Whereas English and Spanish are romanticized. So, I definitely think it has legs. I would love for it to be an animated TV show, but yeah, we'll see.
and I have to ask, because I'm very, very curious. How did you know that we have such a large Brazilian population here? Most people in Massachusetts have no idea that Brazilian and Portuguese is the second most spoken language here in Massachusetts. Most people assume it's Spanish, but it's actually Portuguese.
Well, Jed, my mom is an immigration attorney. So a big part of this book, I didn't include this in the book, but you want to see someone interpreting? Like, see a kid. Say, hey, mom, you need to fill out this G28 form so you can get an alien registration number. My mom speaks English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian fluently, and she operates in those languages at her immigration law practice. And she is a Nobel Peace Prize recipient for her work helping Vietnamese boat people during the Vietnamese boat people crisis in the 1980s with her work at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And she was my father's asylum officer when my father was leaving Iran and sought asylum in Madrid. My mom had escaped the dirty war in Argentina. So when it comes to immigrant populations around the United States, I'm very familiar. And it's not an accident. A lot of these immigration processing facilities and ICE facilities will say, hey, oh, you're from Nepal? You're going to Colorado. They try to match you where there's already existing communities. It's like, oh, you're Iranian? Yeah, you're going to California. Like, that's just how it works. Or, If you are Somali, like you're going to Minnesota, which I thought was like the cruelest one because I did not understand the thinking there, but that's how I know.
Yep. Somalians go to Minnesota and Maine. And I was doing a tour in Maine, and of course every school I'm going to is blonde hair, blue eyes, blonde hair, blue eyes. And then I go to one school in, it wasn't Augusta, is Auburn, Maine. And, in walks, four classes of Somali kids. And I turn and I go to the principal, I go, where did these kids come from? And she explained how, I guess Catholic Charities had opened up but I'm like, Minnesota, Maine, these people lived in a very hot area.
East Africa, yeah. I know the Horn of Africa and the northern states of the United States are very different, but yeah, it isn't an accident. It's by design. Where there's an existing community, just like, there's a huge Swedish population there as well. And they went because of similar climate, but,
right.
Yeah, so that's how I know, because immigration, interpreting, I've seen it from every walk of life and in some of the most desperate circumstances.
Well, hats off to your mom. What a feat and what a great service she's done for so many people. We should is she still practicing? We should give her a shout out. Tell people where to go.
No new clients. She's semi-retired. Just appellate briefs now.
Okay. Well, we should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about the interpreter.
Yes. You can find me. I'm at oliviaabtahi.com. That's A as in Alpha, B as in Bravo, T as in Tango, A as in Alpha, H as in Hotel, I as in India for my last name. Yes, my dad is a pilot. For socials, I'm really just on Instagram at Olivia Abtahi as well.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Interpreter, the brand new picture book from our guest, Olivia Abtahi. Olivia, thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, Jed. This has been such a lovely conversation.
Hey, families, would you like to share a miracle with your kids? At the Wolf Conservation Center, hope was fading. The endangered Mexican wolves dreamed of a pup, but none had come. Until one tiny miracle changed everything. Meet Trumpet, a real-life wolf pup whose incredible birth brought joy, hope, and a lesson in conservation. Trumpet the Miracle Wolf, written by Leocadia George, is a heartwarming true story that will inspire your whole family. Teach your kids the power of hope, love, and protecting endangered species. Get your copy today and join the wild adventure. Join us right now from the great state of Texas. Our guest is here today to celebrate his new picture book. Is called The Origami Kid. Please welcome to the show, Robert McGuire. Robert, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Wonderful. A little cold here. And I had a hard time getting to the gym this morning because the wind was blowing so hard. It kept on blowing me back. And but I strived and I got inside and had a good workout.
Excellent.
Yeah. So tell us about The Origami Kid. I understand that this is based, or it's a retelling of a Japanese fable.
It is loosely based on a Japanese fable. My family is a mixed family. So my wife's Japanese, I'm American, and we raise our kids with a cultural awareness of both American culture and Japanese culture. So, sort of the cultural aspects of the book were sort of natural. This came natural to me, because the book, even though it's loosely based on a Japanese folktale, is really, based on my own children. The main protagonist of the story is based on my own children. Uh-huh. And one of the things we, often did for fun was origami. Mm-hmm. And so it just sort of came together naturally that way. And, the folktale that it's based on, Momotaro, or the Peach Boy, is probably one of the most well-known, widely told folktales in Japan. I would be amazed if you could find a single person in Japan who didn't know it. Kind of like, Little Red Riding Hood, for example. Everybody knows it. So that was like, that was sort of just naturally how the narrative unfolded as I was writing it.
Uh-huh. Well, that's, I can relate in a lot of ways. Our family is also a bicultural family. My beautiful wife's family originally came from Puerto Rico, and so we celebrated all the different holidays and traditions, and it's really fun. I remember people telling me, "Oh, Jed, you're getting married to her, and boy, the culture is going to be so different, and it's going to be so hard." And it really wasn't. I mean, the main thing, Puerto Ricans eat rice and Irish eat potatoes. That was about the biggest difference. But otherwise, but I just love being exposed to different cultures and celebrating the different cultures. And Japanese culture is one of the cultures that our family became very familiar with. There's a satellite campus of a Japanese women's college here in Boston, and they have a kind of a cultural exchange program when they'll pair up a couple of students while they're in Boston with a family, and we do things together, have dinner, and we did that for many years, and it was wonderful, and we're still in touch with so many of the women that we met through that program.
Oh yeah, those programs are excellent. When I was a young schoolboy, I did a program similar to that where I was able to go to Japan, and someone from Japan came over here, exchange student program, and that was what really got me first interested in Japan. And so I lived there for a while, and that's where I met my wife, and we were married originally there, and then came over to the United States. That was many years ago. But yeah, I don't think that's the great thing about having two cultures, is that there's nothing taken away. It just adds more value and more enrichment into your life. It's like languages. Speaking two languages doesn't make one language less. You can't speak one language, less than the other necessarily because you speak two languages or multiple languages. It's just added value. So yeah, it's I think that was really what I like to think about is when it comes to the book is not the cultural aspects of it, which are, great and enriching, are just added value. It wasn't my purpose for writing the book. I didn't set out to introduce Japanese culture. It just came as a natural consequence to when I was writing the story.
That's, I love that. And, I love the name of your book, the title, The Origami Kid. Origami is really something that we would do oftentimes with those Japanese students, and it's a phenomenal art form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful that it teaches a lot of things, fine motor skills for young children, and it's something that all children engage in Japan. They all it's part of their culture, and it's part of what they engage in. And I think it's a wonderful activity because one of the motivating things behind this book was that parents and children are challenged these days with the screen, and parents have to. I think one of the most harmful things you can do for your children is just sit them in front of a screen and this is your let the bots entertain you. What it does is I think it sort of robs the child of their imagination, being able to entertain themselves, come up with stories. The days of, building forts, pillow forts and fighting dragons and going off to the moon in your cardboard box. All of those things built this imaginative cognitive ability within your young mind, doing those things. And then when you don't do those things, then I think it robs your child of something very important. And so part of the motivation was for this book was to give children that motivation to do something else with their time besides just stare at the screen. And so I wanted to do that for my own children. And so we we did origami with them. And what I noticed was they were playing with the origami as little characters in their own little stories, as you might with dolls or figurines or something. And so I thought, well, they're creating their characters, and then they're naturally creating narratives from those characters using their imagination. So that was what was really the motivation behind writing the book. And I think the narrative is what of the book is what it drove that. It does teach origami. There are instructional pages where you can participate along with the character and create the same origami as Mike does in the story, but the narrative is what drives it, because creating those characters is one thing, but then giving them life in a story is an extra layer that I think that's what I was after when I was writing the book.
Yeah. You brought back memories of, we were always excited in our neighborhood when someone bought a new refrigerator, because that box was going to be used for the next 2 or 3
Yes.
weeks, and everybody in the neighborhood had to turn at it.
Yes.
It didn't look like much at the end of the 3 weeks, but boy, we got a lot of use out of it, and so much fun, and it really does challenge your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, that's what growing up for me, watching my own children growing up and, thinking about my childhood and what was similar and what was different, but seeing them use their imagination is the most magical things. Most magical thing that I can witness, seeing them create worlds in their own mind and using their imagination, brings back memories, like you said, of that refrigerator box or the pillow fort, or, you putting a towel around your neck and becoming Superman. So I wanted, I think that was the inspiration. And so you created these things with your own hands, but your mind made them so much more special. Yeah. And so when we're, reading along with the story, we see Mike go through that same emotional dilemma. I'm bored. There's nothing to do. No one wants to play with me. So what does he do? He entertains himself and he creates his own story. And that's what I wanted to hopefully inspire in other children to do as well.
Yeah. We love talking about what families can talk about as they experience an author's book. And I think a natural conversation a family could have is, what did I do as a kid with my imagination? Because I didn't have the screens. And so what would we do? And I think it's a great time for parents to share a little bit about themselves with their kids, let them know that they were human at one time and that they were kids, and they went through a lot of the same things, and also challenge the kids to, kind of go out and really have some fun outside with their imaginations. Yeah.
And I notice with my kids, there's different kids, some are more inclined towards that narrative way of thinking, creating stories and stuff, and some are more analytical. One of my boys he loves fiction. He loves reading stories. Where another one, we take him to the library, he goes straight for the books, the how-to books, the math books, the science books. And I think what I wanted to do was also combine those two, because we have the story of Mike being bored and trying to find something to do. Well, he finds something to do, and he makes origami, which is a very sort of analytical, instructions-based thing. There's a set formula that you follow, and you can follow along with Mike. There's instructions in the book on how to fold your own origami, and you get origami that you can play with in the end. And yeah, so it kind of combines both. So even if your child connects more towards the instructional side, he still comes away with something, very helpful and fun, as well as if you're more, you more connect with the narrative part. I think it combines both evenly.
I think that's a really, really cool aspect of your book, the fact that there are the origami instructions so you can actually fold along with Mike as the story goes on. What kind of creations will kids learn how to make?
So there is several different models, 3 animals. There's a bird, a dog, and a monkey. And then there's 3 objects, a balloon or a ball, a boat, and an airplane. And each one of these animals or objects in the story helps Mike solve a problem or move along in the story. And so these are very basic origami models. One of the things that with origami books you might notice is, and there's some basic origami books, but a lot of times they're very complicated folds. And I think young children would struggle with, but even adults, they're like, okay, like halfway through it's not looking the way I made a mistake. You try to go back. These are like, I try to find the most basic, very simple folds that young children could do, and folds that you could easily, once you've done it a couple of times, you just remember how to do it. Like the good example is the paper airplane. We all know the good old classic paper airplane. It's like, I think every kid should know how to do a paper airplane. So that was one of the folds I included. Yeah.
Great. As you were saying that, I wonder if kids still do fold their paper airplanes at school. We get in trouble for it, of course, because we do it in the classroom. I don't recommend that, but certainly at home.
Yeah, I wonder too. And part of it, again, it's, I don't want to harp too much on the screen, but I think part of it is going back to that just screen is like, you need those. Why did we fold the airplanes? Why did we throw them in school? I mean, school can be very boring for kids. They're asked to concentrate for hours and hours of a day, and kids' minds wander. And I think that's why they would fold the airplanes and throw them in the school, because they would wonder, their minds would wander, and they'd want to entertain themselves. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like, if you could imagine a child not being able to throw an airplane, fold a paper airplane, it's almost a tragedy. It's tragedy. This is one of the basic fun things you can do to entertain yourself as a child. So yeah, I wanted to get back to those basic things like folding a paper airplane.
Yeah. Now, you have to be honest with me. Who is the better origami artist in your home, you or your wife?
My wife, and also I would say my son is the best. He does absolutely amazing, extremely complicated origami that it blows my mind every time.
Yeah. The first time I did origami was after Thanksgiving dinner, and we had a couple of women over enjoying the dinner with us. And at first when they brought it out, and I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be lame. But it was really fun, and it was pretty simple. We didn't do very complicated folds, but all of us were able to create the characters that we're supposed to create, and everything looked as it should, and it was easy, and it was fun, and it's a memory that's lasted 20 years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's just a fun thing you can do when you're bored, and and once you do the folds a few times, they're in your memory, and anytime you're bored or twiddling your thumbs, you can pick up a piece of paper and fold one of those things in it, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Have you always aspired to be a children's author?
I've always been an artist ever since I can remember, and written stories and drew pictures. And in fact, I think the first story that I ever wrote that was published was when I was in third grade. It was published in a local newspaper. So, that's always been a part of my life. I was an illustrator. I illustrated several children's books prior to this one, but I aspired to write, but it's a hard industry to get into. And so this was the first book that I wrote that has ever been published. So, yeah. But
congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about the Origami Kid and find out more about you.
Well, I believe that it's available wherever books are sold. I have a website, robertmcguire.com, and there's links on the website to order the book. And you can read a bit about me on the website as well.
Yeah. Now, any chance you're going to have that this is going to become a series, or that you're going to create a book where we're learning more and more origami folds?
Yeah, I think that would be a wonderful thing if it happened. I would love to continue Mike's story and continue sharing new origami folds. So I hope that does happen. I know that I'm got plenty of ideas and I'm writing away, so we'll have to wait and see.
Well, we're going to put it out in the universe in a positive way that you are going to come back to celebrate your next book in the series, and we look forward to having you back.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
We've had a great time speaking to the author and illustrator of The Origami Kid. Our guest has been Robert McGuire. Robert, thanks so much for being on Reading with Your Kids.
Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. In the meantime, we'd love for you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, @readingwithyourkids on Instagram, and @JedleyMagic on X. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/readingwithyourkids, and our website, that's readingwithyourkids.com. We would really love it if you could write a 5-star review on whatever podcasting platform you may be listening to the show through. We, of course, love the iHeartRadio app. We love Good Pods. We love Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Wherever you find your shows, you can find Reading with Your Kids. And if you found us, we'd love for you to leave a review so more people can join our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Hey, if you're an author, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and click on the Authors Click Here button up at the top of the page. That way you can find out how you can be a guest here on the show. Being a guest is fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of Kidlit fans all over the world about your great kids book. You can also learn about our very effective and affordable promotional services. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, Olivia Abtahi. Please be sure to check out The Interpreter. Also want to thank Robert McGuire. He made his debut podcast with us today, and he is celebrating The Origami Kid. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking to the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.